Good morning. My name is Sue Green, and I am a very proud member of this congregation. And I was asked to do a homily today by Carol Amos, and you know, you do not say no to Carol Amos. First, I would like to congratulate all of you. You are absolutely amazing. Most of us, we don't like change unless it's a good one we've planned, and a change that benefits. But you all, you have managed to get through the last 6 years. The nightmare of the Trump presidency, and the overthrow did not succeed yet. You've gotten through a pandemic that has claimed thousands of lives and brought our economy, likely your jobs, and our way of life to its knees. You have heard the rhetoric and practice of bigotry and misogyny become creepily normal in a widening circle of influence, and yet you are here. You may be battered and exhausted, but you still believe there's good in this world, that the good is worth saving. And what is dreadful and what is wrong can be overcome. You can create change, and you know that if you're waiting for the world to change, you're going to have a long wait. I'm honored to be with you, truly. In thinking about change and how we respond to it, it occurs to me that change is just another word for stress, especially in the sort of examples I've just mentioned. Sure you were paying attention. Change and stress are unavoidable aspects of our lives, some good, some bad. Some of us thrive on the chaos of change, and some of us are beaten down by it. But in common, stress and change take us out of our zone of the familiar and put us in a place where we're tested, where we don't know how to respond, to a place where we can't trust ourselves we can't trust ourselves and our construct, of how our own world works. Now, most of us are very familiar with what we've been told about humans, how humans respond to stress. Behavioral research has told us that when we are confronted with changes we don't anticipate, hormones flood our system and we fight, flee, or freeze. We might think of those responses as we do in unexpected or possibly life-threatening experiences. The zombie apocalypse, alien invasion, dinosaurs after us, IRS audit. But major stressors and threats of change are so frequent now and constant in our daily lives that these responses may just be our way of doing things. We all know people who we can guarantee will come out swinging. Maybe not physically, but their default is to lash out with angry or hurtful words or snarky comments when faced with the unpleasant. And I admit, I'm guilty. My former husband's nickname for me was Scissor Lips. It was well earned and possibly the reason why he is my former husband. There are those who run away from change, take a nap, who do their best to avoid people and situations which might challenge their sphere of comfort. And of course, there are plenty of us who dive deep into the well of denial when we were hit with changes. How about those climate change deniers? Because if I decide it isn't really happening, I don't have to respond. So we turn into a metaphorical pillar of salt. There is, however, another option. As it turns out, the studies which were done, which led to our understanding of the responses of flight, fight, or freeze, what is now our common belief about how humans respond to stress, change, and immediate threats, were all done on, wait for it, men. Very few scientific behavioral or even medical studies were done on women until the 1990s. And this is largely because women are messy. Women have fluctuating hormones, not only throughout their lives, but in every month of the year and in every year of their life. And this is a real bother when you're trying to do a scientific study. It's hard to control for fluctuating hormones. And so, in these studies regarding stress, women were just left out. That'd be over half the population. So how do women respond to stress? Well, in the year 2000, Dr. Laura Klein wondered this very thing. She and her largely female cohorts conducted a landmark study, and I have a link to that if you want. I know you're Unitarians and you will want backup information. The study was on women's responses to change and stress, and as it turns out, this half of the human race, instead of seeking to pulverize, flee, or deny in the face of change, release hormones that produce the tendencies to tend and befriend. It seems women will invest in caring for what they have. For some of us, that's our children and grandchildren, our houseplants, our garden, our pets. For others, that can be rearranging the living room furniture again. When my cousin Allison is feeling overwhelmed with the changes in her life, she paints her living room, which she has done so many times now that when she starts looking at paint swatches, we call for an intervention. Women also reach out to their friends, and they expand their network of friends. Good friends calm us down, give us support. Friends can't fix the changes facing you, but they can help immensely by extending understanding and solidarity to give you the resources to get through these changes. How about that, folks? Tend and befriend. I know this firsthand. In my professional life, as many of you know, I'm a hospice nurse. And while it certainly has its joys and rewards, every day I work with people who are going through perhaps the biggest change of all. It can take all I have. And in my department, I work with 9 other nurses who do exactly what I do. We know what each of us is going through and have the same challenges. And over the years, we've organically developed a support system. Well, we're not besties, but we all know that any one of us can call one of the others and start with, "I need to vent. Do you have 10 minutes?" I know that when I answer such a call, I can't solve the problems or offer any advice that will make a difference. I want to, of course, but the real service I can offer is perhaps the hardest of all, just to listen. I can be the escape hatch that allows steam to vent so that my fellow nurses do not explode. I can behave as a friend. Maybe this can work for you. Maybe if you tend to come out swinging, run away, or turn into a pillar of salt, you might think of adding the idea of tend and befriend to your response repertoire, to your network of care. I know these times ask a lot of us, and I think the onslaught of information and the amount of change we're faced with is designed to make us freeze, to make us feel there's too much, it's too hot, there's too much war, there are too many guns, there's too much hate, and that we are supposed to hide under the covers and wait for the world to change, that we are powerless. But just try this. Tend and befriend. Get the wagons in a circle. Call someone you haven't seen in a while and check in. Drop off some cookies to a neighbor. Go up to someone you don't know well at coffee hour and make a human connection. Send somebody a card. It doesn't have to be big or time-consuming. And you might not change the world, and you might not change anybody else, but you just might make some room to change yourself.
My name is Richard Velasic. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I am no longer a member of the worship team. This is my last official act. I think 20 years, 5 ministers, and I don't know how many ministers in residence. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. So wrote Paul in his letter to the Corinthians, and this my mother often flung at me, pulling it out of context. She seems to have missed the point that Corinthians 13 is about love, not about the work ethic. My later adolescent attempts to set my mother straight, school her in religious exegesis were, do I need to confess it, completely feckless. Her response, why don't you just grow up? Earlier than Paul came Aesop, both historically and in my life. A hefty chunk of my early moral training came from Aesop's fables. Before I could read, my mother read these stories to me. One that really stuck with me is The Ant and the Grasshopper. I'm sure most of you know this one. The ant toils hard to put food away for winter while the grasshopper plays on the fiddle. The original, by the way, was a cicada. I was supposed to learn from this story the virtues of hard work and the perils of improvidence. Some versions state a moral at the end along the lines of, an idle soul shall suffer hunger, work today to eat tomorrow, and July is followed by December. The story stuck with me because it deeply troubled me. I was convinced at a tender age that I was doomed. The obvious hero of this tale, the character to emulate, is clearly the ant exemplifying the virtue of hard work and planning for the future. The wastrel grasshopper frolics and fiddles and fritters away his time, condemning himself to cold and hungry beggary. Oh my. It was clear to me who I was supposed to be and equally clear which I was. Now, Aesop's fables, you may not know, have a long and complex history. This one in particular has a multitude of retellings. There is an alternative tradition, a counter fable also ascribed to Aesop, in which the ant was seen as a bad example. I wonder how different things might have been had I been offered any of these counter fables celebrating the grasshopper. My favorite is a modern reworking by the poet John Ciardi, titled John J. Plenty and Fiddler Dan. It's a synthesis of the two views, where work and play are not at odds. Professor Ciardi finishes his long verse, save a little or save a lot. You have to eat some of what you've got. And say what you like as you trudge along. The world won't turn without a song. The error here is that there's some bright line separating work and play. Mark Twain had it right when he quipped that work and play are the same thing, but under differing conditions. Now I've learned to make necessary drudgery tolerable and at least a little bit fun by turning it into a game. I know that being in a play involves a lot of work, but the play is the thing. Stuart Brown, MD, has spent a career studying play. Play is his work. Yet he finds it hard to define play. He's come up with a list of properties of play, heading his list. Play is apparently purposeless, done for its own sake. Then he proceeds to document the many benefits of play for proper brain development and functioning as a significant driver of evolution, a necessary life function. So I ask the question, what is the purpose of purposelessness? Now, as I was working on this talk, our little dog Bodhi, here he is, suddenly he jumps up on bed, is wanting to play with me. He's working, trying hard to engage me in his play. He is so endearingly insistent. I am struck by the irony of the moment, most certainly not intended by the dog. I find myself annoyed to be distracted from my work of thinking and writing about play by a request from my dog that I take a moment to play. Do all animate creatures play? It seems they do. Sometimes exclusively during the younger phase of life. I like to think of the sea squirt, one of many examples of a sea squirt. In its younger days, it's a free spirit, a frolicsome larva, then quite without warning, a switch is flipped and the larva stops play and settles and cements itself on the nearest surface, a rock, a pier, a passing ship. And for the rest of its days, the far greater part of its tenure lives an entirely passive life, just water flowing through, bringing it food and oxygen. Just as soon as it settles down, it eats its own brain. So the line that led to humans diverged from the Ascidians 550 million years or so ago. This trait seems to have persisted in a significant portion of the human population. As Sue and others have pointed out, we do live in troubled times. Hulihia, Lelo, turned upside down, upheaval. With its accelerating rate of change, we might say the world is playing with us, toying with us, teasing us, inviting us to play. Unprecedented has become the most overused word, as the unexpected has become commonplace. Clinging to old beliefs, rituals, and habits becomes untenable. Put down your work and play with me, says Bodhi. The most important play we can be engaging in now is a play of the imagination. A hallmark of play, Dr. Brown tells us, is that it has improvisational potential. We aren't locked into a rigid way of doing things. We're open to serendipity, to chance. We're willing to include seemingly irrelevant elements into our play. The act of play itself may be outside of normal activities. The result is that we stumble upon new behaviors, thoughts, strategies, movements, or ways of being. We see things in a different way and have fresh insights. When the world seems to be playing with us, perhaps the best way to respond is to join in the game. Donna Haraway lays it out for us. She begins her book, Staying with the Trouble, thus. Trouble is an interesting word. It derives from a 13th century French verb meaning to stir up, to make cloudy, to disturb. We, all of us on Terra, live in disturbing times, mixed up times, troubling and turbid times. The task is to become capable with each other in all of our bumptious kinds of response. Mixed up times are overflowing with both pain and joy, with vastly unjust patterns of pain and joy, with unnecessary killing of ongoingness, but also with necessary resurgence. The task is to make kin in lines of inventive connection as a practice of learning to live and die well with each other in a thick response to devastating events, as well as to settle troubled waters and rebuild quiet places. In urgent times, many of us are tempted to address trouble in terms of making an imagined future safe, of stopping something from happening that looms in the future, of clearing away the present and the past in order to make futures for coming generations. Staying with the troubled does not require such a relationship to time called the future. In fact, staying with the trouble requires learning to be fully present, not as a vanishing pivot between awful or Edenic past and apocalyptic or salvific futures, but as mortal critters entwined in myriad unfinished configurations of places, times, matters, meanings. God is change, proclaimed Lauren Oya-Olamina, the central character of Octavia Butler's novel, and she created a religion around this precept. The parable of the sower. So if God is another word for change, then how am I going to relate to God? Wrestle with God and be wounded like Jacob? Or a character from a Parlagerkvist novel? I could and have ignore and deny God's existence, or play with God, with the shifting concept of God. Work, play, same thing, said Mark Twain, under different conditions. My question, who sets these conditions? To the extent I can, to whatever control I have over setting those conditions, over my own attitudes, for instance, I will bias the action toward play. That's what opens the path of ongoingness. Oh, I did interrupt the work to play with the dog.